Hey, it's me talking about Fabric variable libraries, which have just been released and come out of preview. I can take a look at them and show you how fantastic they are and can solve some of your deployment issues. So the best place to go is the Microsoft Learn website with all the details about Fabric variable libraries. I'll give you a very good overview, hopefully, to give you an idea of what the benefit is of using variable libraries in your day-to-day Fabric processing. They're a library to store your variables. So you're a nice, centralized, consistent, maintainable, collaborative friend. So in a lot of ways, you don't have to hard code values, some parameter values. Maybe you need universally across notebooks and pipelines, or reusable parameters. You can maintain in one location. You can have one variable library and you can use these to distribute them to your team that's building things in Fabric. It's good old write once, use anywhere if supported by your Fabric service of choice. At the moment, we're mainly concentrating on data pipelines, notebooks, and you can use them also now along with Key Vault in Fabric user data functions. So why should you use them? Well, it's a place to store some values which you're going to reuse in your pipelines. They're very good for parameterizing data pipelines. Previously, with your deployment pipelines, you couldn't parameterize the connections. You can now using the variable libraries. It's quite a pain doing it with Fabric deployment pipelines, but deployment pipelines are a bit of a pain anyway. But they're a centralized place. It avoids you hard coding values, maybe a reference value to a key vault or something else, and it's easy to maintain these things. As I say, it simplifies your deployment and development. So for CI/CD, variable values can be updated without having to change code. Perhaps you have a storage account key that needs to be regenerated. You just update it once in your variable library, and away you go. All your processes hang off that, and hopefully, as being a data engineer, it's a nice source of truth for configuration values. We all like that single source of truth as a data engineer. So yeah, collaboration. So team members can see them, document and reuse shared variables. You can also lock them down so they can't use them. They can't change values. You can have read-only members, and you can have people that can administrate them. And hopefully it should encourage consistent naming conventions, because you don't want to just put in spurious parameter and variable names in there. Brilliant. What it's not good for, and I must really push this one, it's not good for secret values only. It's perfect for file paths, database names, connection strings, parameter defaults. Not for example, service principal names and client ID secrets. No, there's a couple of reasons why, and I'll go through that in the demonstration. Before using variable libraries, you have to ask yourself, how do you want to use them? Variable libraries are scoped at the workspace level. You can't have like a common variable library in one workspace and all the other workspaces feed off it. No, you have to have them in your own workspace and referenced in that workspace. So do you want to have one massive variable library? I would recommend having one for platform variables and one for processing variables. You can have many variable libraries as you want. You could have them service specific, one for one for notebooks, one for pipelines, one for something else. What we want to try and do is stop duplicating effort in various places. So yeah, one for platform variables that maybe pipelines and notebooks will use, and processing variables, database connections, something else, something that your process will use in moving data around. The other consideration is, do you want maintain variable libraries in a dev environment where you have your development, test and production variables in there and you deploy them across these workspaces? Or do you want to keep them separate where you don't deploy things and you have to manually update them across your workspaces? One of the things you can't do, as I've mentioned earlier, you can't have a common workspace and then let the other workspaces access the common workspace and do your variables that way. Variable libraries are at the workspace level, not cross workspace. So I'm going to take a look through variable libraries now and show you some of the cool things that they can do. So here's my development workspace. If you do want to create a new variable library, you go to New Item, Variable Library. It'll ask you to create one. Let's create just one, and away you go. I'll not open it. Let's create the artifact. Brilliant. Once you've created your variable library, you can go in and add in your variables. So in the variable library here, one I've made earlier, I've got a couple of variables already. I have my workspace ID, I have a database connection ID and the database ID itself. As you can see, I have two lots of values. I have a default value set, which is active, and a test alternate value set. So when you're deploying across workspaces, for example, dev, test, or production, you can have these alternate value sets and make them active. So I'm in the dev one, I can make this active now. I'm in my dev workspace, set as active. So when I do reference the variable library, it'll pull items from here. Let's set that back to active. Brilliant. I'm going to create a couple of new variables and use them in our pipeline process. So I have a pipeline here. It's fairly straightforward. I have a operations database, a Fabric SQL database with a table, and we're extracting the data out and put it into a data lake. There you go. So I've got bronze, lakehouse endpoint, dev, and my lakehouse, and I've got my dev connection here. Just hover over it. Yeah, dev. So what I want to do is we're having to, rather than when I deploy things, having to use go into the test workspace and reset my connections, which I had to do using Fabric deployment pipelines because I couldn't use deployment rules to parameterize things. I had to go and manually update things. I can now use variable libraries, which will pick up the values from the variable library in test and use those values. And everything is ID based. I'm going to show you how to get those IDs as well. So far I've got my database connection ID and database ID. Where am I getting those from? I'm getting them from the manage connections part. So we need two things to reference our lakehouse and our database, and that's the ID of the connection, which you can find here. There's the connection ID, and also the ID of the object itself. So I'm going to add in the variables for the lakehouse, then I'll update the pipeline. So, okay, let's create a new variable. Let's call this connection ID. In the variable library, you have various types. So it should cover most use cases. You can't have an array, but that could just be a string if needed. So I'm just going to have a string here. I'm going to add in a reference for the default value and also for my test value. So let's just go here. So I'm going to go in and get the lakehouse endpoint for dev, so the connection ID. Grab it from here, Control C. Right there. What it will do is also auto-populate it, but I'm going to change that in a second. If I just go back and let's get my test endpoint settings. So this is the connection I should use for my test database. So for database in test. So we'll throw that there. Cool. Brilliant. Save it. And away it goes. Now you do have the option of adding a little note, which may sound too much like documentation for us developers, so probably will never use that, but you can add in little variable notes to describe where it is, where it comes from, what it will do, etc., or maybe what it's used in. Okay, I'm just going to add in another variable, lakehouse ID itself, again as a string. Where I tend to get the IDs from the lakehouses, just go to the lakehouse itself. I've lost myself, lakehouse. There we go. If you're familiar with the parameters of the URL, you have your workspace ID, and then there's the object name, lakehouses, and this is the lakehouse ID. So I'll just grab that from dev. Control C, throw that in there. Again, it auto-populates it. I don't like it auto-populating. It can be a bit annoying. Let's go to the lakehouse here. Bronze. Grab the ID there. Add that value into there. Brilliant. Save that. Okay, So now I've added in the connection properties, which we're going to use in our pipeline. I'm going to go to the pipeline and start using them. So if you remember, we've got our connection here. I'm going to parameterize these out. So when they do get deployed, they'll pick up the test connection, which you can probably see here as a dev and test connection, as a dev and test connection here. So they'll pick up the correct warehouses and databases when we deploy things across. So the first thing you have to do is actually add the library variables. So you can select your library variables, however you can only select them one at a time. I can't seem to find a way to multi-select. So let's select each one. Cool. So by default, they get named as a concatenation of the library variable, the variable library name and the variable itself. So I've got my variable library name concatenated with workspace ID. And you can also point these to, if you have more than one variable library, multiple variable libraries, and then you can select the specific item that you want. So you can rename them if you want to. So let us use these items in the copy task. So first of all, I've got my connection here. I'm going to change this to use dynamic content. Right, so I have to go to here, library variables, and we want to use the connection ID. So we want to use the initial connection. Brilliant. So we'll click OK, and then it should change. Right, connection type SQL database, workspace ID. You can keep this as is if you want to manually update this. I'm going to show you one way to do it. You could use your system variables and just bring in the workspace ID, which is effectively the same, but I'm going to use a workspace ID from the variable library, and I'll show you why. Add database ID is next. So again, we just find the library variables, database ID, cool, and then it should, let's just refresh. Right, so I'm trying to select a table, I need to refresh it. Brilliant. So as you can see here, by using the pipeline system variable data factory, I've got prompt for a value. Okay, what I'm generally doing is, let's get rid of that. Library variable, library workspace ID, cool. So if I do need to do a refresh, it's already populated. Okay, I could have left the static value, but if I'm moving across from development to test to production, I will need to update that workspace ID. So using a workspace ID in a variable library is a pretty good idea. Okay, right, here's my table, super important data stuff. Destination, we're going to do exactly the same again, but this time we're going to be using the lakehouse connections. So again, dynamic content, library variables, lakehouse connection ID. Let's use the workspace ID. Cool. And the lakehouse ID itself. You can't use names. You have to use the IDs because they will be unique. So you can change the name if you need to. The ID will still persist. So same sort of thing again. Brilliant. So let's save that. Okay, we're going to go and deploy this variable library along with the ingestion pipeline from our development workspace to our test workspace. So in our test workspace, I just have the bronze lakehouse and the operations SQL database. Okay, so let's go to our deployment pipeline. So previously, you couldn't parameterize the connections in pipelines using the Fabric deployment pipelines. You did have deployment rules where, for example, in notebooks, you can change the default lakehouse it's connected to, but you couldn't do that in deployment pipelines for pipelines. So, which was quite infuriating if you're using this to deploy stuff. You can do it in DevOps, but using the inbuilt stuff from Fabric, you couldn't do that. So you had to deploy your pipeline, and you'd have to go in and change your connections from your dev to your test ones. Whereas here, now we've got variable libraries, it can just go straight over. So let's deploy these two items, deploying my ingestion pipeline and variable library. Deploy. Cool, let's go to our test environment, give it a refresh. Brilliant. So there's our pipeline, there's our variable library. and our variable library pipeline should now be reading from the variable library. There you go. So yeah, it'll pick up from the variable library. So important consideration, keep your variable library naming consistent across your workspaces. Don't name one variable library dev and test and so forth, otherwise you'll have to repoint the items. So where do I need to go? I need to just go back to variable library. So in test, now I need to activate, boom, this one. So when the process runs in this workspace, it will now read the values from the alternate value set as test. So this one is now development values is not being used. Okay, right now, so if I just go to the pipeline and run, it should run without issue. Brilliant, that succeeded. So if you had a production environment, you could have an alternate value set for production. So as I said earlier, you want to make a decision fairly quickly of how you want to use your variable libraries. Do you want to have one variable library, development, test and production settings in, which you deploy across all the workspaces, or you just want to deploy the variable library and manually update these so you only have one active value set? I tend to like the dev, test and production one. I think it works quite well. You just have to remember to set as active for the particular value set for the particular environment. So if I have a look at some other examples, so I'm going to show you the notebook example. I'm also going to show you why I think you should not have secret values or sensitive values in your variable library. So in the notebook experience, you can use variable libraries using the notebook utils command and variable library get library. So I'm just going to declare a variable library here. So this command will get the library and it will get all the values. So it'll get all the names and all the items for the default value set only. So it won't get the option of getting back the workspace ID with both these values, alone return the active value set. So just go back to the notebook. So that creates sort of a sort of dict object, which you can then reference using the dot notation. So if I just do that, that should print out the variable library. I can also get specific items from the variable library. So this is just a method of doing it again. So again, slightly different syntax. Rather than just naming the variable, we have to just get the variable library itself and the name of the item. Cool, which should bring back the same thing, so that it does. Now, as I said, notebooks and the way that you use key vault secrets and variable libraries are slightly different. And I say variable libraries aren't really used for secure things. One, when you back them up to source control, they'll back up all this will be backed up in source control. So if anyone's got access to your DevOps, they'll be able to read these values. So with key vault, where am I there? If I just run this secret value, goes to the key vault using some credentials, my key vault URL to get us back a item, and if I print a secret value, redacted. So here I can use the variable, but I can't see the variable, which is very important. So in your process as it's running, if you want to go into monitor, it's going to show redacted. Brilliant. You can also, if you want to, in your ingestion pipeline, where are we? Advanced. Secure your inputs and outputs. So things that are referenced in the variable library aren't used, particularly if you're using API keys or something that's going to hit something sensitive. But by default, variable libraries, these lovely things here, are not secure. Okay? Maybe if Microsoft One has had a little tick box in there and had some functionality, say this should be secure, that might be great. But at the moment, if you want to secure things down, the only alternative is to use Key Vault. If you do need to secure these down, manage permissions, you do have the ability to add permissions, read, write, reshare. So if you don't want to lock them down to specific groups, just to read them, brilliant. If you want someone to administer them or just update them, you have white functionality. So I could add in another user and then share, edit, brilliant. So by default, you've got read. That handsome fellow is John Lunn, which is also me. Thank you very much for listening to me ramble on about variable libraries. If you do have any comments or questions, contact me in the comments below.